The HOA president's voice cracked as the detective read the charges. Mail fraud, attempted extortion, and harassment. She'd stormed into my yard with a folder demanding I pay $80,000 in past due HOA fees for a neighborhood I didn't live in. 2 months later, she was the one writing checks to her lawyer. I'm Daniel Reeves, an industrial electrician who bought a small fixer-upper on the edge of Meadowbrook Estates specifically because it was outside the HOA boundary line. My property deed even spells it out. Not subject to Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association bylaws. That was the whole point. No dues, no drama. Then came Karen Stanton, the HOA's queen bee. At first, it was little notes on my door. Reminder, HOA dues are $250 per month. I ignored them. Then came certified letters, each one larger than the last, adding late fees, special assessments, and even interest charges. By month 6, she claimed I owed $80,000 in unpaid dues dating back to before I owned the house. When I laughed and tossed the letter, she sent 2 collections agents to my driveway. The morning started like any other Saturday. I was replacing the weather stripping on my garage door when a white sedan pulled up. 2 men in cheap suits stepped out, clipboards in hand. The taller one spoke first with a practiced tone of authority. Mr. Reeves, we're here regarding your outstanding debt to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I set down my screwdriver slowly. I don't know the HOA anything. I'm not a member. The shorter one flipped through his papers dramatically. According to our records, you owe $80,000 in accumulated fees, penalties, and interest. Your records are wrong, I said with a calm voice. This property isn't part of the HOA. Never has been. They exchanged glances. The tall one stepped forward slightly. Ma'am Stanton authorized us to begin asset evaluation if you refuse to cooperate. I couldn't help but laugh. Asset evaluation. You mean you're going to stand on my property and guess how much my truck is worth? I pulled out my phone. How about I call the real police and we discuss your trespassing? They retreated to their car faster than I expected. As they drove off, I knew this wasn't over. Karen Stanton had just escalated from annoying to potentially criminal. The next week brought daily harassment. Karen herself appeared at my door 3 times. Each visit more theatrical than the last. The first time she wore what I can only describe as her power suit, a blazer that had seen better decades, and a folder thick enough to use as a weapon. Mr. Reeves, she said with a voice dripping with false sweetness. I'm trying to help you here. If you just pay what you owe, we can avoid any unpleasantness. Karen, I replied, matching her tone. I've shown you my deed. I've shown you the subdivision map. My property line is 20 foot outside your HOA boundary. Her smile tightened. Everyone in this neighborhood pays their fair share. You're not special. Actually, according to the legal documents, I am exactly that, special, as in specifically excluded from your association. She huffed and stormed off, her heels clicking aggressively on my driveway, but I knew she'd be back. The second visit came with backup. She brought 2 other board members, Harold Finch and Deborah Lawson. They stood behind her like mob enforcers while she waved a stack of papers at me. These are the bylaws, she announced with a triumphant tone. They clearly state that all properties within a half-mile radius are subject to HOA governance. I didn't even open my door fully. Those bylaws don't supersede property law, Karen. My deed predates your HOA by 15 years. Harold stepped forward, trying to look intimidating despite being 5 feet 4 inches. We have lawyers, you know. Good for you, I said flatly. So do I. The third visit was pure Karen. She came alone at 7 o'clock in the morning, pounding on my door like the police. When I answered in my bathrobe, coffee in hand, she practically vibrated with rage. You think you're so clever? She hissed. But I've been running this HOA for 12 years. I know every trick in the book. Apparently not the one where you check property boundaries, I said, taking a sip of coffee. Her face turned an alarming shade of purple. You'll pay every cent plus the new penalties I'm adding for non-compliance. Karen, the only thing I'm going to pay for is a restraining order if you keep showing up at my house. She spun on her heel and marched away, but not before shouting over her shoulder with a voice loud enough for the whole street to hear. This isn't over. She was right about that, but not in the way she thought. Karen made her biggest mistake when she filed a lien against my property with the county clerk under penalty of perjury, claiming I was an HOA member in arrears. I went to the clerk's office with my deed, subdivision plat, and a 2003 amendment that explicitly excluded my parcel. The clerk's eyes widened. She called a detective over from the sheriff's office right there at the counter. Detective Morrison was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who looked at documents like they might contain state secrets. She spread my papers across the counter, then pulled up Karen's lien filing on her computer. She signed this under penalty of perjury. Detective Morrison said slowly. Says here she's acting as a duly authorized agent of the HOA with full knowledge of the property's status. That's the problem, I said. She does have full knowledge. She knows I'm not part of the HOA. The detective's eyebrows rose. Can you prove she knows? I smiled and pulled out my trump card, a folder containing emails, recorded phone messages, and most importantly, a deposition from a 2010 boundary dispute where Karen herself testified about which properties were excluded from the HOA. My address was specifically mentioned. Detective Morrison's expression shifted from professional interest to genuine concern. This is serious. If she knowingly filed false documents with the county UTRA, I finished among other things, she agreed. I'll need copies of everything you have. I'd come prepared with duplicates. As I handed them over, I asked with genuine curiosity. What happens now? Now, Detective Morrison said, gathering the papers. I have some questions for Miss Stanton. The detective pulled Karen in for questioning. She doubled down, insisting every property in this zip code was HOA controlled. They showed her the documents she'd signed in a 2010 boundary dispute case. Documents that proved she knew I wasn't a member. That flipped her stunt from civil mix-up to criminal fraud. I wasn't there for the interrogation, but Detective Morrison called me afterward. Her voice carried a mix of professional satisfaction and personal amusement. Miss Stanton was quite adamant at first. Kept insisting you were trying to avoid your obligations. What changed her tune? We showed her the deposition where she listed your property as explicitly excluded from HOA jurisdiction. She went very quiet after that. I bet she did. Then she tried to claim it was an honest mistake that she'd forgotten about that old case. Morrison paused. Hard to forget something when you've sent someone 47 letters demanding payment over 8 months. 47. I was genuinely surprised. I only kept about 30. She brought copies of all of them to prove you'd been notified. Very helpful of her to document her own harassment campaign. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Karen was arrested on a Thursday morning right in front of her house. Several neighbors happened to be outside. What a coincidence. Harold Finch later told me she'd kept insisting it was all a misunderstanding even as they put her in the patrol car. Her bail hearing was set for Friday. I didn't attend, but the local newspaper did. The headline read, HOA President faces fraud charges over false lien. The article detailed how she'd attempted to collect $80,000 from a non-member through fraudulent means. My lawyer, Patricia Kumar, was having the time of her life. In 30 years of practice, she told me gleefully, I've never seen someone document their own crimes so thoroughly. She was very organized. I agreed. Every threatening letter, every false claim, every harassing phone call, she kept records of all of it. She even noted in HOA meeting minutes that she was pursuing collection against the Reeves property despite technical boundary issues. Technical boundary issues. Patricia grinned. That's what she called the fact that you're not in the HOA. Instead of me paying $80,000, Karen got arrested for filing false liens and attempting to collect a debt she knew wasn't owed. The lien was erased within a week and I filed a civil suit for harassment and damages. Neighbors told me she skipped the next HOA meeting because she was in court in an orange jumpsuit. The criminal trial was swift. Karen's lawyer tried to paint her as an overzealous volunteer who made an honest mistake. The prosecutor, armed with boxes of evidence Karen had helpfully provided herself, painted a different picture. The defendant, the prosecutor stated clearly, knew for over a decade that the victim's property was not part of the HOA. She testified to this fact under oath in 2010. Yet, she pursued a campaign of harassment, intimidation, and ultimately fraud to extract $80,000 from him. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her power suit replaced with something more subdued. She kept shaking her head, whispering urgently to her lawyer, but the evidence was overwhelming. When my turn to testify came, I simply laid out the facts, the notes, the letters, the escalating demands, the two men who showed up claiming to be collection agents, and finally the fraudulent lien that could have cost me my home if I hadn't caught it. Did you ever give the defendant any reason to believe you were part of the HOA? The prosecutor asked. No, I specifically bought the property because it wasn't part of the HOA. I showed her my deed multiple times and she continued to demand payment. She said I'd pay every cent plus new penalties she was adding. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Mail fraud, attempted extortion and harassment. Karen's jaw dropped as the verdict was read. She turned to stare at me with a look of complete disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend how her perfect plan had failed. The civil suit was settled out of court. Karen's homeowner's insurance somehow covered part of it, though they dropped her immediately after. The rest came from her personal assets. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She tried to steal $80,000 from me and ended up paying me $50,000 in damages. But the best part came at the HOA emergency meeting to remove her as president. I didn't attend. I wasn't a member after all. But Harold Finch called me afterward with the details. It was brutal, he said with a mixture of awe and sympathy. She tried to defend herself, said she was protecting the neighborhood's interests. How'd that go? Someone pointed out that getting arrested for fraud wasn't in the neighborhood's interests. Then they voted unanimous removal. Unanimous. She voted against herself out of spite, but yes, everyone else voted to remove her. The sentencing came 3 weeks later. The judge, clearly unimpressed with Karen's lack of remorse, handed down 18 months in federal prison for the mail fraud charge, plus 3 years probation. She was also ordered to pay $30,000 in fines. Karen's expression when the judge announced the sentence was something I'll never forget. Pure shock mixed with indignation, as if she still believed she was the victim. Her lawyer had to physically guide her back to her seat as she kept muttering with a stunned voice. But he owed the money. He owed the money.